And welcome back, everyone, to yet another edition of Going for Two, presented by our good friends at Home Field Apparel. I am your host, Matt Brown. I'm the publisher of the Extra Points newsletter here in Chicago. I am joined by my colleague, my co-host and friend, Bryan Fischer. Bryan, we will be joined by other guests later this week. Today, I think it's just the two of us. How you holding up?
I'm doing well. Counting down the days till we see the clash of titans between Duke and Kansas later this week.
Doesn't that suck that we're not getting game day for that? Like, I know where they're going to Florida, Tennessee, and I get that's a big game, and I understand the pageantry, but wouldn't it be fun to have game day in Kansas?
Well, they haven't gone, so I think that's kind of part of it. So and like how many opportunities are they going to have? It's like you almost have to kind of take it as they come. But I know some folks around Kansas were a little disappointed at the decision, but it is what it is. It will be fun to kind of see Nalen there in kind of full regalia for a big Florida game, but. These missed opportunities. I don't know when they'll be able to go back, but we'll see.
We will see. We should talk about Kansas here briefly. Like I will say this, right? They've got 3 home games in a row now. They're 3-0, and I'm going to be honest. Like Kansas doesn't look good. It's Kansas. They might might win 3 games. Kansas looks like bowl game Kansas. Kansas is not messing around on offense. They have dropped at least 48 points in all 3 of their games, 2 of those against teams that are actually, we think, competent. And they are hosting Duke, Iowa State, and TCU. And if you are able to kick the ever-living crap out of Houston on the road, I don't think any 3 of those games are impossible. So if you don't get it for Duke, which would be funny, maybe if they're still undefeated when TCU comes around, maybe. Like then we're talking. Then they're like ranked 14 at that point, right?
Well, I mean, I think that Iowa State game is also a possibility there for Kansas to maybe get the spotlight turned back on. But you're right. I mean, this is one of the more efficient offenses in all of college football, which is not something you would typically say of Kansas. But they've got some good players. They're explosive, and it's fun to see. It's fun to see some of these programs that maybe have not necessarily kind of broken through and struggled for the past couple of years.
That's kind.
Yeah,
we can be honest about where Kansas football was the last decade. Struggled, putting it mildly.
I mean, seriously. Unfortunately, I've watched quite a bit of Kansas football over the years. Especially on some of those weeknight games that they've had. But there definitely were some bad programs there, and you know what, they've passed that torch, I guess, probably over to Colorado at this point, and their old Big 12 neighbors. But I mean, this is it's just a lot of energy around the program, and they coming off the national title in basketball. Like there's a lot of things happening there in Lawrence.
I on paper, like before this season, I think it would be easy to say that the vibes still weren't great, right? Yet you're recently replacing an athletic director. It wasn't exactly super easy to bring in a football coach that you wanted. You're replacing somebody else after scandal. Your roster is not in a super great situation. And honestly, it hasn't been, even just in pure numbers. I mean, for most of the last decade. And you're playing in a league where there's no other real body bag candidates. Like, I don't know if there's not necessarily like a Death Star behemoth all the time. You got Oklahoma, but there's no other bottom of the barrel. They look great. And I have said mean things about Kansas football quite a bit in my career. I think I was looking at this. I believe this is my 11th season doing college football professionally. I have written, I think, at least 2 stories for SB Nation before the Extra Points era where I wondered, and I wasn't completely kidding, about whether Kansas needed to be playing football at all, given the unlikely, how difficult it was going to be to bring them to an above-average program. I am happy to eat all kinds of crow this year, right? It is fun when a team that has been perennially bad breaks through, whether that's Kent State making the top 20, whether that's Rutgers making the top 25. I wish nothing to folks in Lawrence but happiness and health and exciting football. Because whether they win 5 games this year or 9, they're definitely not boring. And you haven't been able to say that since like 2009, I think.
Well, and I think it also speaks to just how you kind of got to change your expectations of a new staff coming in the transfer portal era. I mean, Lance Leipold initially, brought in a lot of his former Buffalo players, but they've taken quite a few transfers from places like North Texas, and others that you kind of thought, well, is that really kind of Big 12 caliber? And they've been able to develop guys and get them in the right position. And you're right about the Big 12 in particular. I mean, that conference, I would say from top to bottom is the deepest in the land right now. There is not that easy pushover game at this point. Maybe not quite as good at the top as say the Big 10 or the SEC, of course, but 1 through 10. I mean, it's kind of tough to argue, especially if Kansas keeps things rolling, and really kind of speaks to really the bottom of all of FBS. I looked it up for my column on Monday on Fox Sports. When you look at the bottom 20 Power 5 programs in terms of winning percentage, 11 of them are 3-0 right now, and only 3 of them even have a losing record at this point in the season. I know it's early, small sample sizes, whatever, but only 3 of those bottom 20, and one of them is Northwestern, which actually is leading the Big 10 West Division standings. So it's like the bottom has rised
every other year, man. I don't know how they do it. It is fun, just like in the. Just like what we learned in Sunday school, eventually the last will be first and the first will be last. We haven't gotten to that point here with Alabama, but it is fun to see that with some of the schools that have historically struggled a little bit. Speaking of things that have historically struggled, I feel like we were just talking about this last week, and like, boy, it's kind of wild to be firing somebody the first 2 or 3 weeks of the season. Lo and behold, another coach is fired. And I don't know what you've been hearing. The word around the campfire is like, I don't think we're going to get to October 15th without at least one other coach potentially joining them. Arizona State is your next position that's opened up. Herm Edwards, was let go on Sunday. I wrote about this on Extra Points in a very high level roundabout way on Monday, and I think a continuation of what we had talked about here before. I don't think generally it's a good indicator of department health if you are firing somebody in early September, not because that decision may not necessarily be justified. I think Herm Edwards it is correct to have Herm Edwards not be the football coach at Arizona State anymore. I think, but it's generally, I would say, a sign of you probably should have done this earlier. I think there was plenty of reason to fire Herm Edwards earlier, not just for what we saw on the field, but for God knows what was happening off the field with all kinds of NCAA issues, roster management issues, half your staff leaving, the fact that your last recruiting class was worse than Campbell, and also Rice and Kent State and a slew of other programs that should not be in the same galaxy as Arizona State. So that's where they are now. As I understand it, there are 2 kind of big questions, or maybe 3 big questions around this job. One is, who gets to make the hire? Like I had written about, and I like many others have said as well, if you're firing somebody at the beginning of September, generally not a good sign for your athletic department. You need to go reevaluate some things. Lots of industry chatter that the house cleaning in Tempe may extend beyond just Herm Edwards. And if you don't know exactly who the athletic director is going to be in 90 days, or if there's even if that's out there as conversation, that might impact the caliber or the specific kind of people that you talk about. When you take a new job, whether that's football coach or newsletter publisher or sales executive, you'd like to know who your boss is going to be, and you'd like to have some sense that person's going to be around for more than 60 days. So that's one big question, and the other one is, how good of a job is this really? And we were just talking about this beforehand, and I tweeted about it. Brian, I'm guessing, actually, I'm not guessing. I know about this because we literally did talk about it. You seem to think more about the potential of this gig in the year of our Lord 2022 than I do. How good of a job do you think Arizona State football is?
Well, I think just addressing that first question, it's not often that you kind of have the post-firing press conference in the ADs coming out and saying, you know what, I don't know how involved in the search I'm going to be. That's not typical.
It's a good point. The last one I could think of was Jeff Long, right after Les Miles was fired, and everybody and their brother was like, this guy's going to have to get out of the paint too. And he kind of, if I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he was using part of that press conference to say like why he should be allowed to be involved. To say, I don't know, maybe it's a search firm, maybe it's my boss, maybe if that's not an admission of the elephant in the room, I'm not really sure what is.
Yeah, and I've alluded to it. I think in our talks on this podcast, certainly in some previous columns, I think there is a wide expectation at some point that Ray Anderson, the AD, it's not long in the job. I think that not only is his performance, in terms of all the on-field successes there at Arizona State been lacking, but there's been you have an NCAA investigation, and that's something that really the lack of oversight over the football program has been a big deal. That's something Michael Crow, the school president there, has constantly referred to as, this is kind of unacceptable. This is not what we do here at Arizona State. So everybody kind of looking at that potential for an AD change as well. They certainly have time. That there's a long enough runway now to where you can probably likely what will happen is Ray Anderson, if he's amenable to it, likely will move over more to the university side. He's got some projects related to some of the development of the campus and university side that he can probably oversee there. And then you come in and bring in a new AD, and that would is at least some of the early talk right now around Arizona State. Get that in place, then you can actually dive deep into a coaching search that, as we will get into a little bit here, I think it is a pretty good job. You look at the kind of Pac-10 going forward after USC and UCLA leave. You know what? It is a pretty wide open league. I know everybody points to Washington and Oregon kind of being the top two candidates, but there's no reason Arizona State cannot be right there and constantly contending for a Pac-10 crowd. They have easy access to talent, not only in that Phoenix metro area, which is growing rapidly. A lot of people coming in, some good high school football being played in the state of Arizona right now. You can get over to Southern California very easy. You got access to Texas certainly. I think from a recruiting based standpoint, it's pretty solid, especially as Western schools go. Facilities are very, very nice, all things considered. They've pumped several hundred millions of dollars, not only in Sun Devil Stadium, but the surrounding facilities that the football practice, football practice facilities and some of the offices around there. And, I just think, overall, when you look at this job and you look at what coaches kind of think of it, they all kind of see the sleeping giant in it. They see the potential, and it's been tough to realize that. This is a program that, although these last, I think 6 or 7 coaches, really dating back to 1979, have not had a losing record when they've left the school. Really, it's only been John Cooper that's been able to have a better than 600 winning percentage. So that kind of tells you that they are kind of that middling program. But I think with some good coaching, some good staff hires, this is a job that you can turn around pretty quickly, as we've seen at places like Kansas and others, in terms of flipping that roster and contending within a year or two. And I think the runway is there, just in a pretty wide open Pac-10, Pac-12, to where there's not really one true dominant team, either historically or kind of on the field recently. So I think that is certainly in ASU's favor. The big thing holding, kind of clouding everything is what's going to ultimately happen with the NCAA and what kind of sanctions they might end up getting out of that investigation. But that could be another 6 or 7 months before we actually get any resolution on that as well.
It's true, and that is a good point. And I'll also say, perhaps in favor of this job, all indications from transformation people and from administrative leaders have signaled that the NCAA is looking at moving away from things like postseason bans or longer term punishments and trying to focus more sanctions on the coaches themselves, which theoretically could mean, if a decision is made ever, like who the hell knows anymore, that it might not necessarily be as structurally debilitating as, say, a 15-year scholarship, like 15 scholarships over 3 years, or a bowl ban kind of situation might be. To your first point, I think you are right with one big but. And that big but is, we don't absolutely know what league Arizona State's going to be in 4 years as of right this second. If the Pac-10 stays together, and we can talk about this here in a second, or becomes the Pac-12, or whatever happens there, if Oregon and Washington and Stanford and Cal don't end up joining the Big Ten in some capacity, then I think you're right. Like there's the historical ceiling and what is possible at Oregon, Stanford, and Washington is not overwhelmingly, insurpassably above what Arizona State could potentially do. I think that's true. But would you bet your career on any of those 4 schools not leaving in 5 years, and then potentially you're in the Big 12, where now your recruiting territory and your historical rivalries or something else might look different? That is, I would say, a not insignificant amount of uncertainty if you're looking at evaluating this particular gig. The other, I think everything else that you said there is true. Facilities are mostly very nice. Tempe, there are worse places to live, and there are definitely worse places to live if you're 20. no doubt about it. You're not far from Los Angeles. You're not far from Las Vegas. And you're also right. High school football in metropolitan Phoenix, and for that matter, also around Las Vegas, has improved as the population has grown. However, as that population has grown, they're not growing with Arizona State fans. That's growing primarily, like not necessarily predominantly, but significantly through transplants. I have seen, like, whether it's the New York Times or LinkedIn data or Facebook data, my guess is the third most popular team in Maricopa County is Ohio State. Just from both Ohio State's success and being on TV, and the fact that like the entire population of Toledo has decamped and moved to Phoenix. Over the last several years. I lived there briefly for a little bit. I saw that too. To say nothing of other programs. Arizona and Arizona State have mostly not been competitive in recruiting elite talent in this state. Historically, over the last 10 years, if you're a top 5 guy, you're going to the Big Ten, you're going to Oregon, you're going to one of the LA schools. And if you're LDS, if you're from Mesa or like one of the little Salt Lake places, you might go to BYU. You're generally not going to the Arizona places, which then, it's a similar situation to Maryland, right? Great in-state talent, usually not sticking around, or New Jersey for that matter. I kind of come back to it looking like this. We don't know what league you're going to be in 5 years. You don't know who your boss is going to be necessarily. A lot of big structural changes. Yes, you can look at everything and say gigantic school, proximity to a gigantic city, lots of talent, lots of sunshine, all these other things. There's a reason sleeping giants are sleeping. Whether that's the fact that generating local interests and engaging all these different constituencies is really hard in a place that's a little bit of a pro sports market with a lot of transplants and people that have a bunch of outdoor things to do. The fact that this program has almost, at least in our lifetime, almost never been consistently very good. It's been consistently fine. It's finished in the top 15 twice in the last 25 years. The handful of Todd Graham years, 8 years ago, have been about the historical highlight, and the situation's a little bit different right now. And you've had a school that hasn't wanted to assemble their booster community to shoot NIL money cannon guns. So I have no doubt that the kinds of people that might take this job, given Arizona State's budget, could bring in a coach that will not embarrass the program, that will be competitive during big regular season games, and could go 9-3 on a regular basis. I think that's very possible, and compete for conference championships. I don't look at this and think this is somebody that should be winning the Pac-12, making the college, grabbing a top 6 seed in the college football playoff, or do anything more than that. Just because I haven't really seen anything in my lifetime since Jake Plummer to indicate that is something that could be expected. And I'm not sure if it's actually easier now than it was in 2002 or 2003.
I think it's a little easier, and just especially in the NIL era. You're looking at one of the biggest fan bases, in terms of just the alumni that they're producing on a almost yearly basis. That they have massive numbers of Arizona State fans, in that area.
There are massive states. One small correction: there are massive numbers of Arizona State graduates, and as we have learned with UCF and other places, having 70,000 people on campus and graduating 11 gajillion people does not automatically translate into fans, but
not automatically, but there is that potential to kind of harness that, especially in this area. And you know what, you mentioned the recruiting earlier. That's a lot of it's just down to who mishiring and not hiring the right head coaches. You think Dennis Erickson's really going to be out there working really hard to recruit the Metro Phoenix area and keeping some of those players in state?
He's not recruiting very hard athletes in Metro Phoenix.
But and especially in the transfer era, you would have thought, somebody wants to leave a Michigan, or maybe a school in the Northeast, and you're a Power 5 player. Come on down to Tempe, man. There's a lot to like, especially in coming those winter months. So this should be a program that is a lot better, just in terms of the actual building blocks that you need to be successful. They're all there for Arizona State, and it's going to be an interesting search. I think in terms of the direction that it goes. In terms of what other head coaches, whether they're at the Power 5 or the Group of 5 level, that might be interested in this. I would imagine there's going to be a lot of young, hungry assistants that are going to try to toss their names, into the mix, and try to at least put their hands up and get an interview, because I think there's a lot going for ASU, and for the right coach. I mean, you just look down the road in Tucson. I mean, you look at the Wildcats. Made a New Year's Six Bowl not too long ago under Rich Rodriguez. Really bottomed out, 2 years ago against Kevin Sumlin. I mean, ASU put up 70, ended up basically firing Kevin Sumlin. Arizona bottomed out, and now they're kind of back on the way up and looking much more competitive under Jed Fish in a very similar kind of roster rebuild that you'll have to undergo there in Tempe. So I think, again, the inherent building blocks are there for Arizona State to be a good job. It is all coming down to, can you get everybody pulling in the same direction? Can you get that alignment institutionally as well, which I think is going to be a big part of this search in terms of, who's making this hire, who's really involved, how much hands-on nature are they really going to have with this football program. But, again, the underlying characteristics are there. And I think, in a market this year that is maybe not going to be quite as active, this could be an advantage for ASU.
One last thing about this gig, and then we should move on. I did notice this afternoon that the betting lines for the early candidates, and I am not somebody who is as well sourced in the agent coaching world. I'm more with administrators or more in other places here, but I did see that Mike Norvell is the number one guy on the lists. Am I missing something? Florida State's looking a lot better, and that's, I would assume, a better gig. Does he have family in Phoenix that I don't know about, or do you know why he would appear on that kind of list?
Well, he is a former offensive coordinator there for the Sun Devils, so there's the program connection there. And then I think there's obviously the difficulties at Florida State. Yeah, it looks like they're going in the right direction, but you got to kind of remember, at least among the fan base, there's still a wanting to do more there at Florida State. And so if this 3-0 start turns into more of a 6-6 campaign, you might be looking for a few greener pastures. And so I think that's why his name has at least surfaced. In terms of, is Florida State going to recommit to Mike Norvell, after the season or kind of later in the season, and say, this is not only a sign of progress. We're adding facilities. There's talk of shovels going to the ground for new football operations building and stuff like that there in Tallahassee. Is that going to be enough? Is that going to be enough for Mike Norvell, or does he kind of look at the playoff path, coming through the Pac-10, Pac-12, saying, it could be pretty easy to kind of turn around ASU and make them a contender pretty quickly. I think that's probably why his name is in the mix. Although I think, when you're looking at those betting odds, that's really just not even informed speculation. That's just Vegas trying to throw something out there a little bit. So I wouldn't believe too much in that, but I can understand from Mike Norvell's end why that name might surface. Especially given the tricky nature of that Noles fan base, and especially one that who might get involved with another candidate in Deion Sanders, who is going to be a hot topic. I think this coaching carousel in terms of where he might land. You kind of want to think, hey, Mike, if you end up finding another job, that's totally fine, because we got another candidate lined up right down the road that knows this place too.
There is so much ridiculous, bogus information that's going to be flying out there around this time of year. It is the time of year when everyone's trying to get their clients some new contracts and negotiate through the media, and trying to vet what is actually real versus what is doing a favor for a source is a challenge. But when we're talking about big investments, we're talking about big deals. I can tell you one source that you can always trust to actually deliver on what they're talking about is our good friends at Home Field Apparel, the presenting sponsor of Going for Two. The good brand has done it again. They've released a bunch of new mid-major and a couple of less overexposed Power 5 programs on Home Field Apparel right now. You've got some new Appalachian State shirts. You have some new Iowa State shirts, including the angry I think it's a Cardinal with the football helmet that's charging towards you. You've got some really great Max shirts. You got the new Wake Forest, new Utah State, new North Dakota State, all dropping. I physically cannot buy any more shirts or take any more shirts for free. My drawer is full. I only wear maximum 2 of these things a day if I go to the gym or go running. I can't cycle through all of these, but hopefully you, dear listener, do not have that problem, and you can find some shirts where you can steal some valor from schools that you did not attend but want to wear their shirt because their logo is so dang cool. Any of the other new ones speak to you recently, Brian?
Some of the recent Virginia ones, the Ohio, pretty much any of the MAC ones, I think top of the list for me. And some of the national championship shirts. The Pitt Is It one that they released a couple weeks ago from I believe it was the 1976 champs.
Good.
That was a good one. So. Baby blue was always a good way to go.
I know. That's why I'm wearing Tulane right now. That's baby blue. It's a surfing pelican on a green wave.
I've got my Colorado shirt on, so I guess I'm repping the Buffs and the bottom of FPS.
It's somebody's got to these days, right? Colorado thanks you for your service, friends. If you want to buy some of these, which I know you do, use promo code Extra Points, all one word, to save 15% off your first order. Help support the good brand. Help support Going for Two. Keep us clothed at homefieldapparel.com. We have another sponsor I do want to talk to you about here, and that is our new friends at Meet at Midfield. Meet at Midfield. If you are a college football Twitter degenerate, somebody, especially if you're in the Big Ten neck of the woods here like I am, you might recognize some of these folks who are veterans of other large blogs, whether that's people who used to be at MGO blog, used to be at 11 Warriors, used to be a lot of the other big independent voices in the Big Ten space. They have launched a new college football project launched to fill a particular niche that's unserved in college football coverage right now, a modern football forum for the exceptionally online fan. If you are somebody that does not have 10,000 tweets or a message board account somewhere with like 4,000 posts, I'm not saying you won't enjoy this. I'm saying that it's a little bit like when I do my Duolingo and you're learning a different language. If you are somebody who is a veteran of the online posting community, which I know a lot of our readers are, this is a space that's probably going to be at home for you. So it's this forum for the very online fan, people that are obsessed with their team and not really into the older, really hostile, really exceptionally negative places that a lot of traditional message boards are. I'm a very online person. I'm not somebody who's going to hang out in 247 or on a recruiting message board right now. That's not really my scene either. So we've built Meet at Midfield says they have built a community for fans of the new college football media that's still Twitter friendly, that want the opportunity for long form, serious discussion of their team in a format that only a forum provides. They cover everything in college football with a special focus on the Big Ten and a special focus on Ohio State and Michigan. I will be around there on the 21st, which is about when this episode will first drop, to answer some inside baseball, NIL, realignment, college football history kind of stuff. And that community will be popping around a little bit. You can subscribe today, get access, get 10% off with the code EXTRA. I will include a link to Meet at Midfield in the show notes, both on YouTube and on this show, the show notes on Extra Points MB, which is our newsletter. Happy to support our other sicko Big Ten friends. Well, not sickos; they're not really part of the sickos Twitter people. You know, that very online college football community.
Yes, very very online. And we talk so much about logos as part of our home field deal. You know, they've got an excellent one as well.
They do. I DJ one of the writers that wrote a long book about Warren G. Harding's like alternate history, where he's a superhero and he's traveling through time and fighting zombies, and also somebody that can break down a 3-4 defense for you. You know, they are unreservedly my kind of people. There's one other. I don't have a good segue from Warren G. Harding to college football sports business, so we're just gonna drive right through it. I'm not. If you want really good, well thought out segues, you should listen to Split Sun Duo. Alex Kirshner is better at this stuff here than I am. One other thing I did want to highlight as I was kind of going through the news here, prepping up for this, was a conversation that Pac-12 Commissioner George Kliavkoff shared with our friend. I believe this was John Wilner and John Casano, right? Our friends that are some of the lead writers out there on the West Coast. It's been a couple of weeks since we kind of picked at the media deal realignment-ish space. Pac-12 and the Big 12 are, of course, in conversations with media partners right now. And we're sort of all waiting for the firm details about either of their next television contracts before we can kind of get an idea of, okay, what is the rest of college football going to look like for a couple of years? You shared a couple of interesting things, but the thing that kind of stuck out to me, and I could be wrong about this here, is the idea that UCLA might not actually make more money by going to the Big Ten. Did you see this too, Brian?
Yeah, I actually heard the interview on that podcast earlier today. So yes, it was a bit. I think the timing thing is more the interesting thing. I mean, George Kliavkoff has kind of gone underground. Really has not done. I don't think any media pretty much since Pac-12 Media Day. And although he did quite a bit there in Los Angeles, it's kind of been radio silent out of the conference. They've made some announcements here and there about some new partners in terms of sponsorships and stuff like that. But that's
eco-friendly NFTs.
Yes, they did announce a new NFT deal. Yes, that was one of the partnerships. But outside of that, been pretty much radio silent, letting the results, I guess, speak for themselves. Pac-12 really kind of getting out to a very nice start. Outside of that Oregon game against Georgia, I mean, the league has gotten some nice wins. Early in the season right now. We'll see as the start of conference play if that can kind of hold up and teams can kind of still rise to the top. But they've got USC there in the top 10 of the polls. You got Utah, kind of right behind them, and this is going to be a very intriguing Pac-12 season. So a little interesting that he picked this week, amongst others, to really kind of get back out there and start talking about those media rights.
Which makes me think that, one, it's possible that they're close to something. This is something that Canzano, I think, teased a couple of days ago, that some sort of advancement of the story. I have not really heard anything super concrete from any AD or any people that are tied to any of those schools over the last 10 days or so. It's been a little bit more silent there too. The argument or the potential idea that UCLA would, I want to forget, I might be butchering the quote here, like essentially break even or not benefit significantly financially by this move, does not pass the sniff test to me. And I don't want to say that the Pac-12 commissioner is lying. And if we are operating on the assumption here that the University of California Regents might impose some sort of tax or penalty meant to financially support the Cal system for taking away money from their TV rights, then maybe I'm listening. Right? Because obviously your travel expenses are going to go up. Your sports sponsorship is and how you fund some of the other sports, potentially changing the lineup of sports. Those all things may go up here. It is hard for me to wrap my head around adding 25, 30, maybe more $1 million in television and conference distribution money annually and not come out ahead financially unless you are just either horrific at managing money or that they have access to some data that I guess folks in Westwood don't seem to have either. What did you make from hearing that?
I think, again, reaffirming the timing is interesting here. There's another Regents meeting for the UC system that is going to discuss this issue on Thursday, I believe it is. So that to me is the kind of, maybe that's an interesting comment to kind of slip in there ahead of that meeting. And you're right. I do kind of question if the numbers actually make sense. I mean, you're talking about likely on the low end, starting out, $75-80 million once they get into the Big Ten in terms of revenue. So you're talking about is the Pac-12 really going to be kind of around $60+ million, to kind of start with in 2024 in terms of media rights? Plus, travel costs are increased, but even if you're chartering jets and all that, that's only a couple $1 million a year. We're not talking about $10 million worth of travel expenses, plus possibly paying that additional sums to kind of the UC system and Cal and some of the others. Like that to me is where it's like, you know what, you need to start showing your math here, because that does not check out in terms of kind of adding up. And so I agree with you completely on that. I think it's just more of interesting comments. He is, George Kliavkoff has consistently said this, that, we'd welcome UCLA back with open arms. It's like, that's great. But everything I've heard out of UCLA is they are moving forward, certainly with the Big Ten move. They're already meeting with their colleagues in the Big Ten conference on various issues, like they're kind of starting to get integrated into the Big Ten. Obviously had some input in terms of listening and what's being thrown their way for those new media rights deals that they will incorporate themselves into. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think this is doing anything but other than kind of stirring the water a little bit and stirring it as they can kind of distract from the issue at hand, which is these are very important media rights negotiations for the Pac-12, and whatever that final number is, whether it's from ESPN, whether it's from Amazon, whether it's from whoever out there, it's got to be significant enough to not only keep some of the current members in the Pac-12 interested, but also possibly looking ahead, as he kind of alluded to in terms of the cadence. Get this media deal done, get that grants of rights signed, and then maybe we consider some expansion after that.
Yeah, I have not talked to anybody, any other reporter, any other administrator, any other attorney that expects the Pac-12 to stay at 10. The question has been more, do you refill this completely through the Mountain West Conference? Do you potentially make a run at SMU? Do you potentially, which, maybe we're
Listen,
not doing.
as a Dallas native, somebody who's born in Dallas, I just do not get the mix in terms of SMU. I understand from an academic standpoint, that is the top, kind of university out there on the board in North Texas. They're not too far out from, the Texas and Texas A&Ms of the world in terms of those like U.S. News rankings and all that. But SMU is just a small fan base, and
Rice is in shambles right now,
and they just do not move the needle in the DFW market.
No, they're like the 7th biggest deal in Dallas, or like maybe worse, depending on how well the Wings are doing. Like it's not as big of a deal.
And again, it's just a small private school, and they've punched above their weight. Certainly they were. You go back, they are really ingrained in college football history, given some of the teams that they used to have back in the 80s and whatnot. But basically, since the Southwest Conference broke up, they've not really kind of been there. And the last 10 years or so, since kind of June Jones took over initially, this is their most successful area since the 80s. So this is as much as people might want to try to will the SMU into the Pac-12, from a travel standpoint, from just really kind of throwing everything in there, they're just not. It doesn't seem like a right fit for what the Pac-12 wants to be.
And plus, again, SMU, although not a religious institution like BYU and Baylor are religious institutions, still not organizationally, institutionally set up the same way secular schools are. I get it. There's a wide net, right? And many of the same assumptions that maybe we would have had circa 2003, not automatically in play here, because San Diego State would have been laughably ruled out 3 years ago. And now that seems almost a shoo-in for whenever this league does potentially expand. I know that he has been adamant that nobody from this conference is going to the Big 12. And I am inclined to believe him so long as the conference continues to exist. If Oregon and Washington leave, like, brother, all bets are off. And you can't say any of that. The one kind of thing to kind of put a bow on all this is I remember, I want to say it was like 2 months ago or right around when Media Day was. And he was pretty explicit about like, the Pac-12 presidents, the Pac-12 institutions are tampering with our schools, and they're reaching out to our schools, and they're trying to get them to leave, and they're trying to sow this instability. Just for, as soon as I saw that comment, I hopped in the Foiwell mobile. And I'm not saying that stuff didn't happen. And so on some level, those kind of conversations through third parties and through consulting groups and whatever, like outside of my reach, sure. But for what it's worth, both Arizona and Utah have told me that there are no communications, email or text message from any Pac-12 president to anybody at those universities in like the last 4 months. So I'm not saying it didn't happen. I'm just saying that the aggressiveness and defensiveness from this particular camp and the places where that camp talks the most are notable. Just like I think we could think of a couple other outlets or individuals that are talking primarily to people on the Pac-12, the Big 12 side, or who are trying to post their way into the conference doing something or another, getting other things out. Like with coaching silly season, media deal and realignment silly season, it's really hard to get accurate and trustworthy information because the people who have the actual info are only talking if they feel like they have something to benefit from or gain by sharing it. And I say this not to criticize anybody, because I'm going to tell you guys a little bit of secret as someone that's broken a couple of these deals. That's part of why people talk to me too. And I do my best not to be a PR person, but somebody is more likely to talk to me if they think that by talking to me, it might benefit them or their institutions or their brand in some way, or they feel like they don't have a choice. So just something to think about as a consumer when you are evaluating what the Pac-12 or Big 12 will or won't do, or will or won't sign in the next 2 weeks. Sound fair?
I think so. And I think it's going to be just kind of interesting to see this play out against the backdrop of the season. Usually a lot of this stuff ends up happening over the summer. You kind of get it taken care of by the season, but that is not the case in terms of the Pac-12 and the Big 12 shortly after it. And I think it is also important to kind of keep in mind that the Pac-12 is in a much more unique position just in terms of these media rights negotiations. They have the Pac-12 networks, that kind of content, they're free to talk with anybody. So, you might be in a quote unquote exclusive negotiating window. George Kliavkoff really kind of demurred and kind of downplayed the fact that whether the conference was in one or not with ESPN and Fox, which is their current first tier media partners, it doesn't really matter because of the Pac-12 networks and the content that they have on there, they can really kind of talk with anybody. Those agreements do run until 2024, but they can still open them up pretty easy compared to some of those first and second tier ones. So it's going to play out. I do think the timing again of him speaking is notable. I think that is an indication that we're at least getting down to kind of the last couple of days. But truthfully, a lot of these agreements, you're having lawyers negotiate it right up to kind of announcement time, and sometimes even beyond that, in terms of actually finalizing some of the details. But who the partners might be, and maybe some rough estimates in terms of the money, maybe that is kind of around the corner.
We will share more information, whether that's in this show or on Extra Points or Collegiate Sports Connect, as soon as we get it, and as soon as it's credible, and as soon as it's like something that advances. I know there is a portion of our audience and a portion of my readership who I love very deeply, and they're just realignment degenerates, and they are trying to parse through every tiny little thing that's being said. I don't have the answer for you right now. I'm trying. I'm also chasing like 7 other things, and it's been silent on all parties here for the past couple of days. But you're right, something worth monitoring. Just like it's worth monitoring if anybody else gets fired this weekend or next weekend. But I think we could probably think of like 2 or 3 schools that are absolutely on any day now watch. We'll see what happens on Saturday. If you
who we got? I'm sure there's odds for this, but I'm just kind of curious. Do you think we'll go 3 for 3 in terms of Power 5 hiring?
I don't know about. You know what? I'm going to do the tried and true, excellent college sports podcast thing right here real quick. I'm going to go check schedules.
Because I know, just speaking of Colorado, since I got the shirt on today from Home Field Apparel, like the great AD support statement came out Sunday. Very disappointed from Rick George in terms of the program. But what, Karl Dorrell's bio, not quite. It's hefty, but it's not that hefty if you know what I mean. So I think that's situation.
Yeah, I know what I took from that statement, and this might have been a little bit uncharitable, was more of, y'all, you got to pay up. Like more than we are definitely committed to the Dorrell administration for the next 4 years. It would be more like, I'm very disappointed. And if 3 of you happen to open up your checkbooks and drop $400,000 each, maybe this is something that could be expedited a little bit faster, because that roster for this season looks absolutely overmatched.
Well, and to be fair, Colorado, back when they hired Karl Dorrell, were kind of held over the coals there in terms of just the timing when Mel Tucker left and all that. You're in the middle of really, he kind of took over right before the pandemic hit, so it's like it's not been the greatest start. But outside of kind of the 2020 season where they managed to kind of sneak into Pac-12 contention, it's just the roster has not been there. And I think a lot of folks would love to see that CU program, especially if you were watching a lot of college football back in the 90s when they were good. Or even before that, like you want to see Boulder, and the sunshine hitting those mountains there, with a good CU team to watch Ralphie run out of the tunnel. It's like people want Colorado to, I think, be good, that are beyond Buffs fans, but it's just like they continually get in their way, and it's a tough job now. It's a much tougher job than it was 15, 20 years ago, and I think just how bad it has been, has surprised a lot of folks. But they are in a position to possibly make a change. I think you look at Georgia Tech out there. Maybe the AD is also tied to moving on from that one. So and I know there are a few others that are already kind of making those quiet assumptions that there will be a search, and starting to do the early legwork in terms of not only before you actually dismiss your coach, but what you kind of got to lay the groundwork for a quick search after that happens.
Those were the first 2 that jumped out to me. Georgia Tech I believe plays UCF this weekend, and in the event of that game getting really out of hand, which I'm not sure that it will, but it could, given how badly that Ole Miss game went, and with I think a fan base and certainly the local media, to the extent that anybody follows Tech at this point, I've completely checked out. That may be a situation where you have to act a little bit sooner. The other one, just because I think it's impossible to fully project what they're going to do at any level, so we should always be Auburn aware.
Well, I mean, even with an interim AD, I would not preclude from dismissing Brian Harsin, especially if things go back against probably their most winnable SEC game left on the schedule, with Missouri coming up this weekend. So that's definitely one to keep an eye on. Although I think everybody understands kind of the situation there in the Plains. Like this one's, we all know where it's headed. It's just a matter of when.
That's exactly it. And Auburn, like Louisville, like we've discussed before, one of those places where everything happens all of the time, all at once. So
Louisville, another one you could maybe keep an eye out for down the road as well.
Yeah, I don't know if that is like this going to happen tomorrow, but this season, the other place that I would say be aware of, I don't think it's going to happen this week because I think they're going to win. But if Houston Baptist goes into Texas State and just beats the crap out of them, there will be conversations had. So this is not something I'm cheerleading. There are parts of the college football internet that do cheerlead this. I'm going to be honest with you. It messes up my Sunday significantly. That's always when it happens. And I'm trying to plan my schedule, and I'm trying to, Sunday mornings are when a lot of this stuff happens. I'm trying to go to do church or do other things. And then now I have to be aware of Arizona State. I personally would prefer we did not do this in week 4. Selfishly, it might happen. So we will be aware of that. All of these things, when they happen, you will find out about them on Collegiate Sports Connect. You'll find out about them, of course, on the D1 Ticker and the D1 Ticker family of publications. You'll find out about them here later, because this podcast is not in the breaking news business. This is not an emergency podcast kind of entity. There are a few emergencies where a podcast is the appropriate remedy, and you will read about it on Extra Points, which you can find at extrapointsmb.com. Bryan, you've got some other cool stuff cooking up here too, right?
Yeah, a new episode of HeadCoachU has already dropped this week. I asked Bronco Mendenhall, speaking of job openings, asked him about the Nebraska job, the Arizona State job, because his name has come up quite a bit in connection with those two gigs. We also talk about late game clock management, which I know is gotten a few fans out there pulling their hairs out, but just kind of his approach to things. Obviously, NIL, college football governance, we also hit upon. So a lot of good stuff on the latest HeadCoachU, wherever you get your podcast platforms, or wherever you're listening to this going for 2 episode as well. So there's that. A lot of also interesting stuff, as you mentioned, on Collegiate Sports Connect. Some fun conversations on that about, what do we have this week? Licensing, the world of licensing. We got some interviews about how to be an AD. Talked to some folks with at Kansas. Like there's a lot going on out there, and it's all kind of right there on Collegiate Sports Connect, as well as the D1 Ticker.
Speaking of Bronco, if he did decide to come back and coach, and if things broke a certain way, I think he'd probably do pretty well at Colorado.
Yeah, that is definitely a part of the country, I think, too, that he would really enjoy. I think he has talked quite a bit on the podcast about, those bottom programs that do take a lot of rebuilding work. That's what he likes. That is kind of one of the reasons that he got attracted to Virginia. And I think, a job like Colorado, I can definitely understand. I mean, he grew up in Utah, obviously coached at BYU, but he's been around the country. Was at New Mexico for a long time. One of the least resourced institution, and was able to win there with Rocky Long and turn that program around. So he would be certainly a name that would, I think, come up in the mix for a job like Colorado.
When I think about him, of a place where you have a longer leash and is also academically oriented, Colorado's a great school. I would be a place, given how I've heard him talk about Virginia and some of the things that he liked about BYU, I could see him fitting in pretty well. If David Shaw left, I think he would probably do well at Stanford, or he could do well fly fishing and driving around an RV.
Well, we get into it on the podcast this week, as he just finished his new house there in Montana. So he's packing up and moving into there, but he's got his ranch there. He's very comfortable, but he does want to get back into coaching. So his name's going to come up. He's one of the, you look at the Tom Hermans out in the world. You got Dan Mullen. Both of them are TV analysts. So there are some options if the ADs want to kind of move quickly. And like we said a couple times on this podcast, if they want to kind of pull the Clay Helton, where you hire somebody maybe early November, kind of before the portal really hits, where you can kind of self-evaluate a program. There's actually some decent candidates out there if you want to kind of go that route, and instead of hiring somebody that is currently in a job or maybe is an assistant at a different program.
Yeah, a great point. Very opportune time to be regularly talking here to Mr. Mendenhall. You can find all of that on those other platforms. We'll have that there in the show notes. We'll catch up with you with, I think, a fun, very going for 2-ish special guest later this week. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll catch up with you all soon.